The Vikings have a new weapon in town. They traded for Lions tight end TJ Hockenson. We're breaking it all down here on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
Ooh-wee! You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Of course, you can also catch us on Amazon Fire or Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. You can get all of our Minnesota sports offerings. Today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. It's daily fantasy made easy. Just pick a few players, whether or not they'll do better or worse than their Prize Picks projection. You against the house. You can win up to 10 times your money if you're right. And you can get a 100% match up to $100 on your first deposit if you enter promo code Locked On at prizepicks.com or get the app. Oh boy, TJ Hockenson. The Vikings got a new guy, and that is a very exciting guy to get. Got Matt Dery of Locked On Lions coming on later on the show to talk about it from their perspective. But first, some of the raw details of the trade if you missed it. The Vikings acquire TJ Hockenson and a couple of fourth-round picks this year and next. They send back a second this year and a third next year. One of those fourth-round picks can be downgraded to a fifth-round pick if the Vikings win a playoff game. That is the trade compensation. So it's like a 2 for a 4 and a 3 next year for a 4 or 5, depending on if they win a playoff game. That's the trade compensation. So they end up with the same amount of picks. They just downgrade a couple. Considering where those picks are likely to be, considering the place that the Vikings are at right now, 6-1, adding pieces, kind of driver's seat for the 2 seed, maybe even competing for the 1 seed if Philadelphia doesn't keep it together. That's kind of where you're aiming, right? Driver's seat for the division at least. That means you're picking pretty late. Lions look right now, they are in the driver's seat for the number 1 overall spot. So those are going to be pretty high, which means the picks you get from the Lions are a little better than most fourth rounders, right? So that's part of it. And if you wanted to do a little bit of guessing and a little bit of estimating, rule of thumb for, downgrade a pick around when it's next year, do all of that stuff. The vibe that I got on this one from the charts, the general ballpark is somewhere around a late 3, early 4 is the difference between what we gave up in draft compensation. So think of it as TJ Hockenson for a compensatory third. How would you feel about that? I feel really good about that. I don't think that is enough compensation. I think Kwesi got away with one. Spoiler alert, Matt Dery agrees of Locked On Lions. I just think that that's an underpay, and that rocks. And the reason I am so high on Hockenson, and I've been high on Hockenson, I think he's one of the cornerstone pieces of the Lions. And I'll talk about it with him. I don't get what the Lions are doing here. But part of that reason is just because of how versatile of a piece that he is and how many things he can do for your team and do well. It's one thing to be, Johnny Munt is also a versatile piece, but he's inconsistent. He has bad blocking days. He has days where he has the drops, right? Days where he can't separate. He's got days where he can do all of those things, but he's not a consistent piece of all of those things. With Hockenson, you can build any offense because a tight end that can do anything is pretty much a piece of any offense. Show me an offense that doesn't use a tight end that can do anything. Even the 10 personnel happy Rams still used their Jared Everetts. And Kyle Shanahan's got his George Kittle. You've got Travis Kelce in the Chiefs. Those guys aren't just big receivers, right? Not like Mike Gesicki is in Miami. Those guys are really do it all guys, and TJ Hockenson isn't on the level of Kelce or Kittle. There's, those guys come along once in a blue moon. But that versatility is very important to unlocking other stuff in the offense. We talked when we were going to play the Lions in week 3, we talked a lot about that run game, and it was leading the league at the time. Hockenson was a huge part of that. And the way the Vikings run the ball, they rely a lot on tight ends one-on-one with defensive ends. Duo, that's like kind of the weak spot of duo everywhere that it is run, is that your tight end has to hold up against a defensive end on a run in the middle of the field. You can't let that guy get penetration. Now, there's a lot of ways to help that tight end out, and there's a lot of, offensive coordinators probably have a million different ways. You can chip him with another skill player. There's angle stuff you can do. There's all kinds of ways to help that mismatch, and it is a mismatch. Hockenson can win that battle and make it so you don't have to do nearly as much of that other stuff, and now your skill players can be freed up to go dig out nickels from the second level, or they can run things at more traditional angles without having to help that guy. That all sort of trickles around to the rest of those players. Now, in Detroit, the vibe of Lions fans is like, well, he has 2 good games a year. Whatever. I'm glad we got draft picks, right? And they're kind of offloading him. They're not nearly as happy. And look, for a top 10 draft pick, that is disappointing. You probably want more out of a top 10 draft pick. We did not spend a top 10 draft pick on him. That is an important thing for how this is going to feel a little different in Minnesota than it feels for Lions fans. If you're reading what like Detroit press or reading what Lions fans are saying online, it's going to feel a lot different to them because they picked him 8th overall. That's way more important, right? But when they say, oh, Hockenson only has 2 good games a year, that means Hockenson only has 2 productive receiving games a year. And I also think that part of that is just the fault of the Lions. I think that you can squeeze more out of him. But also that it just means that he only has a couple games a year where his role is primarily as a pass catcher. And that is a choice the Lions can make, and it's not one the Vikings have to make. And I don't think it's one that you have to make with him. It's just that when you can do everything, why would you ever have him only do one thing? Being the guy that catches the ball is only one part of a greater passing play. Football is an extremely symbiotic sport. It's something I think I say on the show every day. That role, the production that will disappear from Detroit now that he is gone. I'm not sure if some of those fans really understand how much less you're going to get out of Amon-Ra St. Brown or whoever. Like the run game too, like it's going to, I think, impact them more than I think a lot of Lions fans realize. And I think it's going to impact the Vikings a lot. I think he's an impact player in ways that just don't get a lot of glamour. And that's really exciting. Plus, it's not a huge price tag. I know it sounds like, man, we traded a 2nd round pick. We didn't trade a 2nd round pick. We traded a 2nd round pick down to a 4th round pick. We traded down in a couple of rounds 2 years in a row. That's what we did. We traded down for TJ Hockenson. The price just doesn't bother me very much because at that point, I mean, look, the mid rounds of the draft are where the draft happens. And that's where the difference between like one pick and the next still does matter. You trade a 5th to a 7th and your odds are pretty minusculely changed, but there it still does matter. And it is like they did pay something. It's not nothing, but it's pretty small for the impact that it has. The other thing here is Irv Smith is on IR with that high ankle sprain, and he will be out for like 2 months. So that's obviously an impetus for this trade, though. They were already calling around before Irv Smith got hurt. We'll get into all of that, but first, it's important to keep your house safe. That is the kind of thing you want to have before you need. And that is what Simply Safe can give you. Simply Safe is, look, it's the cutting edge. It is the modern era's home security. It's not just an alarm on the door. It's motion trackers. It has AI that helps to figure out what threats are real and which kind of authority needs to be called and to dispatch the proper authorities to your home in the case of an actual emergency, but not if the cat walks through the wrong door. So if you are trying to set up home security, but you've been putting it off, listen up right now. Locked On Vikings listeners can order the #1 rated Simply Safe home security system for 50% off. It's their biggest offer of the year, and you won't want to miss it. Simply Safe was named the best home security system of 2022 by U.S. News and World Report, and that is the 3rd year in a row. In an emergency, 24/7 professional monitoring agents use their Fast Protect technology exclusively from Simply Safe to capture critical evidence and verify that the threat is real. Don't miss your chance to save big on the only security system I can recommend. Get 50% off of any new Simply Safe system at simplysafe.com/LockedOnNFL today. It's their biggest discount of the year, so don't wait. That's simplysafe.com/LockedOnNFL. There is no safe like Simply Safe. Thanks so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day. Check out Locked On Sports Today as well. Tons of trade deadline news. They're talking about that, the World Series, all of that. Locked On Sports Today does all sports, but it's a daily show like this one. If you came in hoping for some Arizona Cardinals film breakdown, which is what we would usually be doing on a Wednesday episode, I apologize. Something came up. We're going to have to talk about that instead, but I will still talk about all the Arizona Cardinals stuff on Patreon. That's what Patreon is for. So go check me out at patreon.com/LukeBrownNFL, and I'll show you some of the cool stuff I think they did, especially on defense. Patrick Peterson, Dery Smith, something to be determined on offense. We'll be going through that throughout the week, but we're going to talk about TJ Hockenson and go into Commanders mode tomorrow. So that's the way the news cycle breaks. But Irv Smith is on IR. That's the other big piece of news. High ankle sprain, gets put on IR. That's what makes the roster spot to make room for TJ Hockenson. And obviously that is unfortunate. He got rolled up by Alexander Mattison. Super unlucky play if you go watch it. Just like super bad stroke of luck. And I still think Irv Smith has been more unlucky than he is injury prone. I know a lot of people get real mad when players get hurt a lot. I know that really annoys some people. But remember, these are the toughest humans in the entire world. And if they could play, they would be gutting it out, probably beyond what is healthy for them. Just something I feel like I have to remind people because people get a little weird about that. But look, that doesn't mean that the outlook for Irv Smith in Minnesota looks any better. Chris Thomason said that a source of his said that Irv Smith is a lame duck in Minnesota. He's in a contract year. He's not going to be back until like the playoffs, maybe like January, 2 months. I mean, that's weeks 17, 18. He's going to be back for so he's going to miss a lot of that, and he's probably not going to be starting over TJ Hockenson. TJ Hockenson is a much better pedigree than Irv Smith, and he's just a better tight end than anybody in the Vikings room right now. So Irv Smith probably walks at the end of this year. If you want to daydream about a compensatory pick, no, he's got to get a contract worth like $3 or $4 million to get one. Sometimes under $3 million, we'll get like a seventh or something, but he's got to get like a real contract. It can't be like a vet min thing. A guy who is all potential and suffered a lot of injuries, so we never got to see it, is never going to be something that that teams put a lot of stock into. He's probably like a real conditional contract, a lot of incentives, that kind of thing, which is a little bit harder on the compensatory formula to parse out. So if you want to daydream about it, know that you got to hope that somebody takes a real chance on him. But it's kind of over for Irv Smith in Minnesota. But replacing him with TJ Hockenson is just straight up upgrading. So, yep, that's fine. We're going to be okay with that. Hockenson situation right now, I don't know what he costs on the Vikings cap. I think somewhere in like the $1.5 million-ish range, which they have most of that in cap space. They may have to make a little bit to nickel and dime their way back under to make that work. I don't know the exact math there, but it's not a problem. And then next year he's got $9.5 million guaranteed, which does put the Vikings, they're now projected to be over the cap in 2023. They have a million ways to make money, one of which is extend TJ Hockenson. So now Hockenson is in a little bit of his own de facto like contract year and a half. And if he can really ball out, like if he really excels in the next 10 games, 10, 11, 12 games, that, or maybe 13 or 14, right? Let's not count anything out. Then you can extend him that offseason, get that $9.5 million cap hit down, wait for the real money to kick in next year, and sort of continue on the same way the Vikings have been going on for about 12 years now with those contracts, the way Rob Brzezinski has drafted them up. That's the dream scenario, right? Is that Hockenson plays well enough to earn an extension, and now he just heretofore is the Vikings tight end. That would be awesome. And then you've got Johnny Munt is basically a backup now, 12 personnel guy, or maybe he rotates at 12 personnel with Ben Ellefson once Ellefson comes back on IR. I believe he has one more game that he has to miss, and then we can start to think about whether or not he'll be able to come back with that groin injury. But for now, it's Hockenson and Munt as your 12 personnel, and then TJ Hockenson can just like play just about every rep, except for reps where you don't have a tight end on the field at all, which are pretty rare. The Vikings like to live in 11 personnel, one running back, one tight end. That one tight end is going to be TJ Hockenson. Look, he's a really, really good blocker, and he's very athletic. So he can separate, he can get downfield. He can do, again, like be the clear out vertical on Dagger. And what that means is Dagger is a basic and a through. So like you might know it as a dig route, that kind of deep in, and then something running right through it makes a little dagger on the play chart. That is a staple pass concept. We have seen Justin Jefferson catch a million of those over the middle this year, and in basically every McVay concept, every playbook has dagger. When you can have a tight end be that clear out on dagger, it allows you, like when you don't need like a speedy burner, you don't need to use your slot corner on that. It allows you to fold in more complex versions of dagger, and those are harder to defend. That's the kind of ripple effect that a guy that like TJ Hockenson has. I'm not expecting the Vikings to have traded, a second and a third for 2 fourths and a guy that gets 1,000 yards. I don't think that he's going to be that kind of guy. He's not the our production now runs through TJ Hockenson kind of guy. He is another, Justin Jefferson just gets 300 more yards than he would have otherwise. That's the kind of thing. I don't know if 300 is like a right number, but you know what I mean? Like his impact will show on everyone's stat line, not just his own. And that's an important thing to remember as we go forward here, that Hockenson is a role player. Being a role player isn't an insult. He's an incredible role player, and that role needs to be played. And so I am very, very, very excited about this trade. I hope you can sense that. I'm super into it, and especially where the Vikings are right now. 6-1, driver's seat into the 2 seed, right? That means 2 home playoff games. If you win the first one, you get another home playoff game if you get to be the 2 seed. And they've got like a bottom 10 schedule the rest of the way. The door is open. And whether the Vikings deserve to or not, they are contending. That's kind of what I've been saying here. That is contending. You get 2 home playoff games. You can probably win them. You'll probably be favored in them. And if you can make good on that, if you can win that, suddenly you're in the NFC Championship. What's more contendy than that? And most of the argument against it is like, well, yeah, but the Vikings aren't good enough to take advantage of that. Well, that's a big step. And that kind of move, it's not like an all-in move, because it's not like they gave up a ton of stuff. They just have slightly less draft capital than they did before, right? They're not mortgaging the entire future. They bought into a guy, and by the way, if you play your cards right, that guy can be part of that future. So you just spent some stuff on your future before it actually was the future, right? So that's another reason I really, really like this move. They're in a spot to contend, and this brings them closer to that contender level of ability. And the future has 1 less third-round picks worth of picks in it, if you want to go by the trade charts, right? So minus a third-round pick plus a TJ Hockenson. I probably would have done that anyways. So that's awesome. So we got Matt Dery on the horn here. We're going to talk to him about all of this, and we'll kind of get the Detroit angle on this trade. But first, let me talk to you about Prize Picks. It is daily fantasy made easy. Daily fantasy sucks. I don't like coming up with a whole lineup and then like submitting that into a pool with 6,000 other people. It's daily fantasy as it was meant to be, is you against a projection, you against the house. I think Justin Jefferson will just do better than that this week, you can say, and you can do that 2 to 5 players and make up to 10 times your money if you're right. Prize Picks does that, by the way, not just for football, for all sports. So go check them out at prizepicks.com, or you can get the Prize Picks app. You can enter promo code LOCKEDON to get a 100% match up to $100. Put in $100 as your first deposit, you get $100 back. Put in 50, get 50, and so on. That's prizepicks.com, or you can find the app at the Google Play or App Store. Promo code LOCKEDON. What's going on here? Impromptu crossover.
Yes.
I'm Luke Braun of Locked On Vikings, here with Matt Dery of Locked On Lions. Hello to Lions fans. Vikings fans, welcome in Matt Dery, because we made a little in-division trade. Second big one between our two teams since Kwesi Adofo-Mensah took over. You include that big old draft trade.
Luke, I've always wanted to ask you, any relation to Lloyd Braun?
No.
Do you know who that is?
No.
Oh, come on. From Seinfeld?
I'm not a Seinfeld guy. I can't
Luke,
do it.
Very disappointing.
I'm sorry.
Your Vikings
Wrong
are running
generation.
away with this division. Let's talk about it.
Yep. What, 3.5
for you,
game?
bud.
Well, thank you. 3.5 game lead. Like bottom 10 schedule for the rest of the year. Like ton of weird teams on there. And even the teams with like good records are like the Giants and Jets, and we're not sure if they're for real. And now they make this move. Yeah, they are going for it. And I don't think they expected to be a team going for it. I think I expected this to be more of a transition year. You know, they'd have a bunch of growing pains and they'd lose games because they busted coverage. And they did bust a bunch of coverages. They just haven't lost games because of it. They just keep winning anyways. And now they've come out of the bye, I think, a little more polished. And I mean, they had a need. Irv Smith on IR. He'll be out probably for like 2 months. So they did have a tight end need. I did not expect it to be this guy. I kind of figured they would go for a tight end or a wide receiver and then they would just like live in 4 wide. But I was looking at like Albert O in the Broncos. I was thinking like, what about like Mike Gesicki or something? Hockenson felt a little bit like pie in the sky, both because I couldn't imagine another Lions trade in season. I couldn't imagine the Lions giving him to a division rival, but I couldn't imagine the Lions giving him up at all. So what's the catch?
Well, let's talk about this. And I mentioned this before you came on my show, is that it's disappointing, I think, for the fan base here because they're just so sick and tired of this. You know, Golden Tate's our second best receiver and our leading receiver.
It's like
our leading this, and he gets traded during the season. Now, here's TJ Hockenson, second leading receiver on the team, your best tight end target, and he gets traded. Now, I understand you're 1-6, and if you can get something for him, and this second round pick is obviously the key there because the rest of it is a bunch of pick swapping. But the second rounder this coming year is big. But I think that Detroit fans do overrate Hockenson a bit. 2 years ago, Luke, he was a Hall of Famer. He was a Pro Bowler and he was very good. He had a great first game a few years back. His rookie year, his first game in Arizona, he went crazy. And you're like, oh my gosh, top 10 pick. We took a tight end and we were talking about Eric Ebron. No. This guy's unbelievable. He's been fine. And he's had some big games. The Seattle game this year, he was unbelievably good. But there's other games that you watch and you go, oh yeah, TJ Hockenson. Like, why doesn't he touch the ball more? It was interesting today, Kerryon Johnson, the former Lion, somebody tweeted to him, well, Ben Johnson hates him anyway, so they're just getting rid of him, Ben Johnson being the offensive coordinator. And Kerryon said, no, Ben Johnson loves him. But biggest play of the game this past Sunday, a 4th and 2, where the Lions needed to convert down 4, and TJ Hockenson stayed in to block. Like, why isn't he out in the flat, or why isn't he over the middle, like catching the ball? So it's interesting to say the least. He's going to make $9.5 million next year. Can be a free agent the year after, but you could also franchise him. This is not like, I love these people that say, and I'm filibustering here, Luke, but bear with me. I love these Lions fans say, well, he wasn't going to stay anyway. Well, why not? If he wanted 15
that's what I'm saying.
Right. I mean, if he wants 15 mil a year, you could tag him. So that's weird. But I think this is a great pickup for the Vikings, and I think he's going to do well there. I do.
Yeah, there's always that thing where it's like, why doesn't this guy touch the ball more? A lot of times there's a reason and you just can't suss it out. But what I have always seen in him is that he's this unbelievably dynamic blocker that also can be a pass catching weapon, but like the versatility of it, that he's good at everything, not just fine at everything, not just a guy that can do everything, but that he's like a plus asset at everything. That's my idea of TJ Hockenson. Am I, and it's especially that he's a blocker. Am I on the right track there?
I'll be honest, coming out of college, they said he is a dynamic blocker, and I don't think he is. I think he's fine. Okay. I think he's been a little bit disappointing in that department. I think with a new coaching staff, a running game, and not that the Lions' run game is bad, but it's just never healthy with Swift. But now that Cook is back, Madison, an improved offensive line, O'Connell's scheme, I like what the Vikings are doing. And I think that I think it's going to be a good fit there. I do. I think he'll be okay. Yeah. Not the greatest blocker, but a guy that I think needed to kind of be unleashed a little bit. I don't understand why. You're right. The Seattle game earlier this year, they lost 48-45. He went nuts in that game. And then the next week, he gets 4 targets. It doesn't make any sense. But I think this fit, and with Irv Smith out, another in-division trade, which is going to be vintage Lions, because I'm sure he'll come back to haunt them at some point. I thought it was a good move for Minnesota.
It's the only a more cursed team where this comes back to bite the Lions instead of all this kind of stuff always comes back. I mean, if you want to talk history, of regrettable trades. We got one that put any of yours to shame.
I get it. Oh, of course. Yeah. And now he's running for senator. So.
Don't buy him, Georgia. Trust me. Trust us.
Gosh.
Buyer's remorse. But no, the Hockenson's role here is really important because the Vikings rely a ton on tight ends blocking defensive ends. Both their protections and their run plays rely on leaving that matchup one-on-one and hoping that he'll get help schematically and with the angles and stuff. Like, it's not just like, hoping, but putting him in that situation, putting that pressure on him opens up a whole bunch of the other stuff. And the Vikings also want to live in their 11 personnel with one tight end. If that can be the same guy every time, where before it was more of a committee, it was everybody had their role. You had Ben Ellefson, who was like only a blocker. And then you had Irv Smith, who was like kind of a blocker, but mostly he was your downfield guy. And then you had Johnny Munt, who was a little bit balanced, but kind of just okay at all the things. If you have somebody who can do everything and just replace that committee with one guy that can get 85% of the snaps, then I think it just makes the Vikings that much harder to read. And I'm hoping that that's the idea. But I guess I'm still just kind of wrapping my head around it, getting to know this guy. And I guess what a gut check. Are you happy with what you got back? Are you happy with the pay?
Well, I don't think it's enough. Like I said, second round pick back is fine, but then a bunch of pick swapping is what it looks like to me after that. And you're giving up. I figured if you're going to trade TJ Hockenson, it would be Hockenson straight up for like a 2 and a 4 or 2 and a 5. And instead it's Hockenson for a 2, but then, a 3
2
here,
and a 3
but then you're giving
for
up a
2
4
4s.
here. Right. And so
that could go down if the Vikings win a playoff game this year.
Right. It would go from
2 and a 3 for a 4 and a 5 is
right. So
what would happen there. So who knows?
And look, it's just the timing of it too. I know the trade deadline is today. It's funny because after Hockenson was dealt, Lion fans on the Twitter machine were like, "All right, well, let's just ship off Swift then. Let's just ship off Decker then. Then what? Then you're going to do a tear down again?
Yeah,
that's what So the Lions also
that's
have James Mitchell.
Me.
Say it again.
That just baffles me.
Right.
Like this felt like it was going somewhere to me, and that's like on Locked On NFL with Ross Jackson. You can find me talking there on Tuesdays. The Lions come up a lot for me because they finally felt like my whole life they've gone nowhere, and they finally felt like they were going somewhere. And like they felt like there was, I don't know what it was toward, and it didn't feel like it was a Jared Goff team, but they were building something that could maybe turn into something in a couple of years. And they're like taking steps backwards, isn't it? Because you didn't want to pay a tight end. Is that it? Like what do those picks turn into now that they are higher picks? What does that turn into that's better than a like cornerstone, do it all Swiss Army knife on your offense? Hasn't he won the C too?
That's the thing. It's like if Brad Holmes speaks, and he hasn't as at the time of this recording, or Dan Campbell or somebody comes forward and says, "Look, we really wanted to, we didn't think he was going to be somebody we could retain or something like that, or we like James Mitchell, who's a 5th round pick tight end or 4th round pick tight end this year that finally caught a pass this past week, and they've got Brock Wright, so we've got a couple of decent tight ends there, but nobody as good as Hockenson." I don't know what they're going to say about it, but the bottom line is, like I said before, with the timing, team is 1-6, and you want to be retaining in year 2 as you build upwards. You want to retain your good players, and now you're trading one away and didn't get a 1st round pick for him. Not that, I don't know. I mean, the 2nd round pick this year is going to be low if the Vikings keep winning. So that's where I'm at with it, Luke. Yeah. I think it's a good pickup for the Vikings. I do. I like that fit with Cousins. I really do.
I love this fit. I'm positively giddy about it.
Hey, look, good for Minnesota to go for it.
Yeah, it seems like we're kind of in lockstep. I feel like the Vikings could have paid more and I still would have liked it. That's like the litmus test for me. Like if they didn't get one of the 4th round picks back or something like that, I still would have felt pretty good about this. which is interesting because Kwesi overpaid the first time we traded with the Lions. So the draft
Yeah,
pick
but you got some
compensation,
decent
whatever
players
charts they're
back.
working with is.
Yeah.
No, we found a way to get guys that, I mean, they're all injured, so haven't really seen that work out. But like on the like value charts and all that stuff, it felt like trading down, he didn't get enough back, and this time he didn't give enough back. So I don't know. It's a weird relationship these two teams have, and I can't imagine this is the last time they trade. So maybe we'll talk again. We'll certainly talk again when the Vikings travel to Detroit. What, December?
Yes, sir. All right. We'll do it again. Always a pleasure, Luke Braun, Locked On Vikings. I love talking to you, buddy.
Yeah, great to talk to you, man. Talk to you again soon. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for listening to the Locked On Vikings podcast. I'm looking forward to seeing what TJ Hockenson does. We'll talk about that over the coming couple days. Tomorrow we got David Harrison on. We'll talk to him about the Commanders. He does Locked On Commanders, and we're moving on to Washington. So again, if you want a little more Cardinals analysis, you want to know how the defense stopped them and stuff, check me out on Patreon. You can also check out Locked On Sports Today. I'll see y'all tomorrow. And as always, Skull.